Hello. All right. Let us let us consider this to be started. Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Tabitha Sable, one of the co-chairs, and welcome to another rather small Kubernetes SIG security. I'm glad that I can be here to help us to make this space together for ourselves and each other to improve Kubernetes security together.
Okay. Hi, my name's Ian. My pronouns are they, them, and Tabby already said all the things that I was going to say other than the pronouns. So
Oh.
I'm the other co-chair. Hello, everybody.
Hello, I am also Ian. I am four-letter Ian in this group normally.
I'm three-letter Ian.
Agents of Chaos at Control Plane, pen tester, person who likes breaking Kubernetes clusters and CI pipelines.
I've dropped a link in the Zoom chat to the meeting notes doc, so that way everyone can add themselves to the attendance and be able to follow along or add things to the agenda if they like.
Hey, I'm driving Benjamin Floyd, Principal Information Security Architect at Michael's Stores. Jumping back in here finally. So just dropping in saying
Great
hi.
great to hear you again.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you.
I can also introduce myself shortly. Benjamin, IT security student, and yeah, from Germany, doing some Kubernetes research. Yeah.
Welcome.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I will volunteer to take the notes this time. And having a look as we do at the report back from the fabulous subprojects. First thing that we have here on the list is third-party audit. Is there anyone who would like to read out on behalf of audit?
I can read on behalf of Audit.
Thank you, sir.
No bother. Yes, so third-party audit is a sub-project which runs regular third-party audits for the Kubernetes project. I am currently working as part of that group. I was also part of the vendor performing the audit for 1.24, which was a couple of years ago now. We meet every 2 weeks at Wednesdays at 9 Pacific, which I think is still correct. I don't think it's one of the meetings that's had a shuffle. We have had a response from the SIG leads from COPS. So COPS or KOPS requested to be included in the scope of the next audit. We had some discussion around, they specifically wanted COPS for AWS, which we felt was possibly narrowing the scope slightly too much for a fairly broadly scoped previously audit. But yes, we are working on gathering responses from SIG leads and also other bits that have become new. So cluster API, Windows, we're looking at any feature releases that have gone GA since 1.24. There's not been a huge amount to add other than that, other than we are aiming for an RFP publication of mid-September, which I notice is now not that far away.
Yeah, it's about a fortnight now.
That's slightly concerning. That one had not noticed. I hadn't noticed. But yes, we are aiming for not too long before we get the RFP published.
Excellent, excellent. Question about KOPS on AWS. Is that like, is support for KOPS on AWS specifically like new, or has it received a significant amount of work recently that would make that particular platform be of special interest as opposed to, any other platform that KOPS supports?
I don't actually know the response. I didn't see what Ray received from the SIG leads. All I know is that that was the only group who had reached out, and they'd said specifically for AWS.
Okay, then.
I feel like I realize that slippery slip arguments are logical fallacies, and I'm just going to own that in advance. I worry a little bit about setting a precedent of scoping things to specific cloud providers like that. That feels bad to me because we want this audit to be, I think, maximally useful for everybody. That's not really with my chair hat on, but
Also with my chair hat off for a moment.
yeah.
Yeah, maximally useful for everybody was a much better phrasing of what I said on the meeting, which was, given that this is an audit to help all of Kubernetes, the benefit to the vast majority of users won't be seen if a lot of time is spent on one distribution with one very specific cloud deployment.
Yeah.
We feel like KOps is entirely reasonable. The consensus on the meeting was focusing on Kubernetes/kops makes sense, but looking specifically at AWS does feel a bit too focused.
Yeah, that's sort of, I think KOps would be useful too. But yeah, general KOps. Like, are they opposed to doing that, or are they just especially excited about AWS?
I will take that as a question for Ray to the next meeting.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like, because I could see it being reasonable for them simply to be excited about it on AWS for whatever reason. You know, perhaps they recently merged a big new feature that they wish they had been able to review in more depth or something. But like,
this also feels like potentially a target for something more like a self-assessment.
yeah.
Yeah. At least if they wanted to be that specific. I mean, I guess KOps in general could be a target for a self-assessment, but I'm not opposed to having it like looked at like that either.
Could also just be time and cost, right, of covering multi-cloud as opposed to the single, you know, the larger elephant in the room, so to speak.
Yeah, but like, that's not, I mean, yes, sure, but also historically, that's not how we do things. Like
Right.
we try to be
I agree.
multi-cloud, you know?
Right.
Well, and like the main third-party security audit has always tried to be more cloud agnostic than multi-cloud, like with a specific focus on the parts which are universal no matter how you are running Kubernetes. Like,
Yeah.
I would encourage if there was a desire to do a thorough audit of KOps, like on all of the cloud platforms that it supports, spinning that up as another audit on its own, because that feels like something where folks could spend quite a bit of time, and it could improve safety for the user community.
Thank you. You articulated that better than I did. Appreciate it.
Because like there's all kinds of scary nooks and crannies in the gap between what is Kubernetes and what does it look like when you run it on, you know, your favorite shark-shaped cloud provider. And so that does seem like a reasonable thing to do, but there's so much space there once you start talking about multiple cloud providers that definitely feels like you could just do an audit for it there. And that's a thing that I think we could do a better job of making available to the rest of Kubernetes. Like, I don't think the rest of Kubernetes necessarily realizes that if they have a reasonable use for doing an audit of something, they can come and talk to us and we could run an ad hoc audit of whatever dollar thing is. That's certainly a space within the realm of possibility, but I don't think it's ever happened.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between a SIG saying, hey, if anyone has any spare time, we've got this thing that we'd like looked at, and a very expensive, well-funded, scoped commercial audit.
Mhm.
And I do think for the larger commercial one, that keeping this as broad as possible makes sense. I know when we did the audit before, we basically said, we'll look at the K/K code base, and then we'll run kubeadm where we need a cluster, because it's kind of the most vanilla we could find.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the implicit standard configuration, and like
Yeah.
you see that reflected in other places too, like in the CIS benchmark, all of the tests are written from the assumption that you are kubeadm, and then if you aren't kubeadm, then you have to translate that.
And if it's specific to a specific cloud provider, there's an entirely different set of benchmarks, which I think is notable for these purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also the issue of potentially others patching code as well, and us not knowing if the code we're reviewing was actually built from the Kubernetes source.
Oh, like for like if we if we ran the audit and, you know, Tabitha Cloud offered generous cloud credits in order to run the audit on, you know, Tabitha Kubernetes engine.
And if Tabitha Kubernetes had decided to backport security patches in a way that didn't match a patch that was somewhere else upstream and so on, yeah.
Yeah, and like maybe that could be arguably good for her users, but it would not be representative as a platform to run the audit on.
Yeah, I think we should make this as broadly useful for as many people as possible. Again, still.
Any further thoughts, questions, discussion, topics around progress towards the
maybe
audit?
maybe a thought from my side. So basically, if KOps is like planned to get audited, then I mean, then we may also think about like auditing other, let's say, I don't know how it's called, like the Kubernetes creation tools.
Yeah,
or,
like
the deployment
distributions or
tools.
installation tools.
Yeah, exactly. For example, there's also like KubeSpray that I think is also maintained in the same way as KOps. I can send you a link to the GitHub. Which
Is
basically does this.
Kubicorn still maintained? I don't remember if that was under SIGs or not.
I know KubeSpray are responsive to security issues because I pinged them before with stuff. So I know that they are definitely still, or they were active 18 months ago.
Ah, okay. Yeah, and my thought basically was if like KOps is audited, then probably the other distributions or like cluster deployment tools, or however we want to call it, yeah, they probably also should be, right?
So it's worth saying that we did reach out. Ray reached out to all of the SIG leads. So any
okay.
distribution which is an official Kubernetes SIG will have had the opportunity here. What this audit definitely won't be covering is something like Rancher or some Talos, or something that is running Kubernetes but is not a official Kubernetes project.
Yeah, see it.
But yes, I think keeping this as generic as possible will be most powerful, at least for the user base.
Yeah, of course.
And you could easily spend hundreds and hundreds of person days trying to review everything that comes under the Kubernetes banner.
We
Yeah,
do like to
exactly.
fight for the user base.
That is literally what we're here for. Agreed.
Anyone see the Nine Inch Nails are doing the soundtrack for the next Tron movie?
Maybe another question from my side. I see that there's like the Windows nodes are in scope now. I don't know how the external audit works, but does it maybe make sense to like give that one to an external reviewer, because like Windows is kind of different from everything else, right?
So to explain, all of this will be going to an external reviewer. In terms of the CNCF are funding an audit here, which will be put out to tender for any security vendors to bid on. So this isn't just
Okay.
SIG meetings. This is going to be a paid project. I think last time it was around 90 person days from a NCC group.
But only like, but goes everything to the same reviewer, or is it split between? Because like probably the company that reviews, let's say, the cell and validation admission policies may not have like this, may not be as good in Windows in reviewing the Windows nodes.
There has
Because
been a joint submission in the past. I think the first audit, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong here, was Atradius and Trail of Bits. That rings a bell. Is that right? It was definitely two
Yeah, I think
companies.
there was a little more. I think there was a little more history there. Like, I think one of them started it and then pulled in the other as a subcontractor or something. It was a long time ago, and I was
Okay.
not personally in the room, but
I remember it going a little differently than that, but I will say that there is enough history there that we did not do a split audit again.
Yes.
okay,
As an aside, is there a list of testers that or audit firms that have, Kubernetes experience such that they would be considered, expert?
So we are working this time with, I have forgotten the name of the group, and that is awful, Ostif, who are helping with the vendor selection. And they have, the Ostif website has a list of prior audits which have been performed and why they chose the vendors.
Cool, thank you.
what's the company called? Sorry, Ostif?
Yeah,
yeah, it's
Oscar
Open
Sierra.
Source Technology Improvement
Oh,
Fund.
okay.
It's one of the Linux Foundation directed funds, and it seems like it's generally spun up to reduce the need for every single CNCF project to have a third-party audit subcommittee the way that Kubernetes does, because there's a fair number of things that Kubernetes does that are not scalable to projects that have a dozen maintainers.
Okay, yeah, didn't hear about that one. It's interesting.
Yeah, Benjamin, the meeting invitation should be available, for at least the link to the third-party audit meeting notes is in the main SIG security agenda. So if you want to read the notes and join future meetings, the more the merrier.
Cool, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, I sometimes have like customers that are asking what the review process is looking like, because in Germany we have some regulations that, yeah, you need to tell your regulator how the audit is proceeded and which company does it, and so on, so on, so on. So that's kind of interesting to answer those questions.
Especially for something like Kubernetes, where the answer is the audit firm is chosen by an open public competitive bidding process where the overall proposal from each audit firm is evaluated on its merits. Like I know from the last audit there were several responses and they differed significantly from each other, like not just in cost, but in what the proposed plan of action for each one of the proposing firms was, because the scope is very large, and so like spend 5 minutes contemplating each line of Go code within KK is not actually a practical plan for that audit, and so then it's a balancing question of what do you do to focus auditor time in order to maximize the chance of finding interesting things within a reasonable amount of effort. So there was a lot of interesting judgment there reflected in the different proposals that the different firms made.
And I can
Nice.
tell you, to peel back the curtain slightly, a significant chunk of the previous audit was driven by Ian thinks this thing is weird and has colleagues who are very good at reviewing Go. So Ian's going to point them at the weird stuff and ask them to work out how it happens, please.
I mean, I think that shows part of the benefit of an open community approach to things because, in some sense, you get the benefits of a white box audit, or at least a lightweight version of those benefits, and some of the benefits of outside perspective by having that sort of approach, because you're like, from working with Kubernetes both upstream and also like as a consultant, you have developed an informed sense of which doors squeak when you open them at night, and that is a meaningful thing to drive investigation with.
Yeah, the audit spidey sense is very real.
Mm-hmm. So, any further thoughts, questions, discussion topics related to third-party audit? Okay, so SIG Security Docs is subproject that works across SIGs to improve the security content of Kubernetes documentation and create additional standalone security documentation like the concept pages, blogs, that sort of thing, in order to improve the security of Kubernetes across the user base by ensuring that folks have ready access to good security knowledge. So, updates from the most recent SIG Security Docs audit, SIG Security Docs meeting. There are 3 PRs open, which have a call for reviewers. There is the application security checklist, link in the notes document here. There is a hardening guide for the Kubernetes scheduler, which has gone through several rounds of review already and is pretty good. So if somebody wants to have a look at it and either make additional suggestions or LGTM, that is a great way to help it move forward. And there is a new blog post draft here on DevSecOps with a link to that PR. So please have a look at those if you are interested in those subjects and make helpful suggestions, and we can get these things published. Shout out from Savita to Ray for hosting the most recent SIG Security Docs meeting at the last minute. Appreciate that, and I always love to see the way that we help each other. Thoughts, questions, discussion topics about what's happening in SIG Security Docs?
Sorry, I was opening the application security checklist. That's pretty cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that one in particular, I think is a good place to look, because when you think about Kubernetes, a lot of the educational resources are sort of unclear on whether they are aimed towards someone whose primary focus is administering Kubernetes, like as a cluster administrator, like as a infrastructure team kind of person, versus how much of it is aimed towards someone for whom Kubernetes is simply an implementation artifact, like someone who is a developer at an organization that runs their prod on Kubernetes. And I like that this doc is starting from a very specific assumption of who is the target audience. It is someone who is using Kubernetes because it is the platform upon which their code runs. And so, like, what are common things that someone in that position ought to be thinking about, like, without going into all of the depth that you would get from an assumption that the audience is a cluster administrator. Like, I just want my apps to run, man, kind of user. And I think that's a gap.
Yeah, it's almost like a conversation, right? Like an interview, a set of interview questions or something like that, right? Like if you're going to go, to this cluster, right? What questions do you ask the host of the cluster, right?
Yeah. Like, what are the things that are almost certainly under your control, as opposed to other things which you may not be able to do anything about? You may simply have to accept whatever you get from the folks who provide your platform.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, thanks for having a look at that. It's super helpful. Any further thoughts, questions, discussion topics related to SIG security docs? All right, so next on the list here we have SIG security tooling, which is a subproject that works to keep Kubernetes more secure with code that is maintained in community with other SIGs. They have an alternating meeting schedule every 2 weeks, Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific, and usually alternate between a working session and a learning session. There has been fairly quiet progress in SIG security tooling at the moment. I'm not aware of any particular updates of work that has come out of there since the last time we were together. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add related to SIG security tooling? All right. So I have been hosting the SIG security tooling meeting for a little while, and so anybody who would like to come and say hello on the next one, you will almost certainly see me there. Next that we have on the list is SIG security self-assessments. And is there anybody who would like to speak about self-assessments?
It's the elevator pitch here.
The elevator, okay, so the elevator pitch for SIG security self-assessments is that SIG security self-assessments provides scaffolding and some experienced hands to help folks within Kubernetes do assessments of their own code or their own project in order to develop a better understanding of its threat model. So there is a process that is documented there where folks will get together with maintainers from a Kubernetes subproject that is working on a self-assessment and folks from the SIG security self-assessments group and other interested folks, because that's how we meet new people and that's how we develop new experiences. And they work through a process of building out data flow diagrams for the workflows within their application. And then based on those data flow diagrams, perform a threat modeling exercise in order to learn new things about terrible things that could happen inside their application. So Yes, unfortunately, there is still a problem with the meeting notes, Doc. They're related to the owner of the doc working for an organization that has recently been bought out, and we are working to rescue the meeting notes doc, but unfortunately, it is currently still inaccessible. So the current status there is that they had been working with SIG etcd to start to do self-assessment of etcd after it had come into Kubernetes and become a SIG, and they are currently on a hiatus while bringing up to speed new leads for that. And so if you are interested in helping out with that, especially if you are interested in helping to take over leadership of it, then reach out in the Slack channel or reach out to Ala, who is the outgoing lead for SIG security self-assessments, and we will figure out how to bring things back into motion. So, Benjamin, we have gotten to the place where we have the various topics that folks have brought to discuss here in the group. Tell us what's on your mind, please.
Yeah, so basically, there was the bug in Kubernetes with the GitHub API thing. I don't know what the name was, but I searching the discussion in Slack currently. So give me a second.
The recent
storage
vulnerability with Git repo volume type.
Yeah, correctly, with the Git repo one, and it's deprecated. And what I wanted to do is, I'm currently I did wrote a little program that basically templates validating admission policy for every deprecated Kubernetes API. The main problem is, the main problem is the documentation differs from what's actually deprecated. So there are like two sources of truth, which makes the auto generation quite hard.
Yeah.
Because if I find the discussion, I discussed it with Rory in the Slack. Where is it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So basically, take that one as an example. So we have this, and we have. We have this one, for example, the GCE persistent disk volume, which by documentation, which by API reference doc is not deprecated, but if you look in the docs, it is deprecated. Maybe I'm maybe I'm throwing something.
Interesting. Yeah, like GCE persistent disk volume. I would guess that this is deprecated because I believe that all of the in-tree cloud providers support generally is deprecated. Like, I believe that is the stage of the Cloud Controller Manager migration that we are at the moment.
Yeah, I linked a discussion I had with Rory. And the main problem is that's not the only thing that is that's not deprecated. Also, that's like a duplicated, deprecated.
There are many things like that that are marked as deprecated in documentation,
exactly.
But I'm guessing not in the API.
Yeah, correct. Not only the API, also in the what is this called? In the JSON for the API, the API spec. Also there, it's not deprecated in the description. So for some fields, you could just do like, okay, I grab for deprecated in the API specification. But for some, you cannot do it because it's not deprecated from the API specification. I need to have a look if I find it in the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Swagger JSON. Yeah, in the Swagger JSON, some things are deprecated, but some aren't. But if they are like deprecated in the docs, they only may be deprecated in the Swagger JSON. So there's no like real, let's say,
There
real
isn't
like
a yeah
single
there
source of truth.
yeah, there isn't a trustworthy machine parsable way to determine whether a given Kubernetes feature is deprecated or not. Have you found examples going the other way where something is marked as deprecated, like in the API definition, but not in the documentation?
I
This
didn't
is
search for it
curiosity, by the
specifically.
way, not a pop quiz, or I'm not trying to give you a pop quiz anyway.
No. I didn't search for it. So basically, I only checked also like only some examples. So I mean, I can just automate it and do a script and double check it, and then post it later in the SIG security channel, because I think that maybe also it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I didn't
that
check for it.
seems like an important thing to know, and I'm not especially surprised that the situation has arisen because the Kubernetes codebase is so large and so much of it has a lot of history. It seems like over the past 10 years, things would pile up where like everybody knows that such a thing is deprecated, and maybe it's marked that way in the documentation, but 5 years ago when something was deprecated, it slipped somebody's mind to also update that in the API specification. And
Yeah.
since then it has gone like that. That could potentially be a pretty valuable thing to put in a big commit for, or a bunch of little commits for, of like, mark this deprecated in the API spec, mark that deprecated in the API spec, with, like a link to the K website PR from 5 years ago where such a thing was marked as deprecated, and be like, let's bring this all into logical consistency. Let's get the automated markers placed on everything that is listed as also being deprecated in the docs. I mean,
I
if
think that would be
if
interesting
that's a
to
thing
do.
that you feel inspired to do, oh my gosh, please let me encourage you.
Yeah, I think what I will probably do is I will like modify the script a little bit, that I can at least like see the difference of what's deprecated in the docs and what's deprecated in the API specification. And then afterwards, I mean, we can see how much difference there is. And if there's a lot of differences, then yeah, that will be a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah, but like if you generated a list of that, we could open that as an issue in KK of like umbrella issue Kubernetes features with mismatched deprecation documentation, and even just a list saved in the issue of what those features are, and then anyone who had the opportunity could work on those one at a time, and any one improvement in that does make the world a little bit better.
Yeah, that for sure.
Like just merging the PR for marking the Git repo volume type as being deprecated would make the world marginally safer. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be every single thing done before there's value. Each little thing you do makes the world better. So that would be really cool.
Yeah, then I will probably do it. I mean, it isn't that much of an effort. But yeah, the main painful, or the most painful thing to do here is to like map the things in the official Swagger JSON to where I can find it in the documentation. So because sometimes there's no like link to the Kubernetes documentation, or to see what's written in the documentation about what's inside the Swagger JSON. So yeah, that's
and
doable.
And I don't know if there's an easy back reference there that would be necessarily easy to find either. Some grep through a local checkout of the K website repo might be useful there, like especially if you have the so everything has the auto-generated API documentation that gets auto-built from the Swagger spec. And so if you were looking for documentation related to a certain feature, looking within K website for links into the auto-generated API spec docs might be one way of finding places in the documentation that reference a certain feature of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know just offhand whether we do have like a consistent link to the auto-generated API docs on each page that describes a feature.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's from the Swagger JSON. There are sometimes links to the docs or to the Kubernetes website.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if there are links from the website to the
back into the
Swagger
docs.
JSON. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That is a really good find.
Yeah, I mean, I will find a way to do it somehow.
Thank you. That's really cool.
But yeah, I mean, I need to find like an intelligent way to do it
Mhm.
because otherwise,
Yeah.
doing it manually will take a lot of time.
Oh well, I'm guessing that there is a pretty large number of things that are deprecated, and so if you wanted to manually inspect every single one of them, yeah, that could potentially take quite a bit of time.
This also sounds like a free finding for whoever's doing the next audit. Hey, there's deprecated stuff. I just second monitor Googled some of the deprecation migration guides, and my brain already hurts. So good luck to you diving into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I definitely encourage you to feel good about whatever progress you generate. Like, do not feel like everything has to be complete for it to be valuable. It is super valuable to have each improvement.
Okay. Yeah, we'll give my best, but
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It'll take some time, I think.
Well, thank you. That'll be super good. Any further thoughts, questions, discussion topics related to that?
The link that was just posted, I am having trouble opening that.
Oh, it's a huge JSON file. So like GitHub will not show it in its pretty view.
Gotcha.
You would have if you open it raw, then you get
Yeah. Okay.
probably like a
You can
megabyte worth of JSON.
Love it.
You can use the one I posted. It's the raw one. It's just like a bunch of JSON. Basically the API thing of Kubernetes.
3.1 megabytes worth of JSON, in fact.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's
good.
And
it is wow, and it is a JSON blob that we update. It is not an auto-generated thing. Like if you look at the commit history on that JSON blob, you have human beings adding and removing lines in there.
Oh, that's also interesting. I thought it was auto-generated.
It looks like at least some of it is, and some of it is. Now I'm unclear because I had thought that it was auto-generated, but it's commits to add and remove a lot of individual lines, which
That makes me a little itchy.
Yeah.
That should be included in the right in the assessment, the audit. What validates that?
I wonder
okay.
if this
Well,
is
this might be one of those. This might be one of those workflows in Kubernetes where there is a big auto-generated thing and the output of it is maintained in GitHub. And so when you change the inputs to the auto-generated thing, then you must also regenerate the auto-generated thing and then commit the diff. Like there are workflows like that in Kubernetes, and I am just not personally familiar with the workflow that updates the Swagger JSON here. So do not necessarily believe me. Believe what the documentation says. All right. Any further thoughts, questions, discussion topics there?
I'm gonna maybe go back a little to the documentation and maybe the wrong.
Yeah. What's on your mind?
So the application security checklist is
Mhm.
recommending not to right auto mount service account token.
Mm-hmm.
But that may be counter to the way that that's deployed in some of the clouds, right? So there may be a need to. I don't know how that works here with like if it's like GKE does workload identity federation based on the service account.
Mm-hmm.
If you apply this, right, you would disable the ability to use their native service account stuff that they tie into. But I don't know if that's a call out that belongs in there or not, right? Because that could get very verbose.
Yeah. Thoughts there?
Yeah. So I think if you use like the workload identity in GKE, then basically what it does, it ties your Google Cloud accounts to the service accounts inside of Kubernetes. I think that's like that's only a usage pattern that you will have in the major cloud distributions. So that will not work in, for example, any other Kubernetes distribution that's not running in
Right.
any cloud. So
Yeah.
so it's something that's cloud specific, right?
I'm just wondering, right? So if this is for general application developers to evaluate their use, their app deploy in a cluster, right? And unless they're running their own, right? They have that too. But for the folks that are in cloud, right? Where does it make sense to call out? Look through this, but also potentially because you're running this in a particular environment, you need to consider these other things as well.
Yeah, I think unless explicitly being used would be, I think disabling the default service account for sure. And if you are using one, use the not default one. So that reduces your chance of some random RBAC manifest on the internet applying,
Yeah, that one for sure.
Default. So yeah, definitely don't use the default service account. Seems like a freebie to me. You're right. I saw a couple of presentations a couple of years back on workload identity that made me go, these service accounts are actually really useful in a lot of ways. So yeah, disabling them entirely maybe wouldn't help. Although if you're disabling auto mount, then you can still explicitly mount a new service account token, right? So maybe that's, I realize I rambled there, but I just remembered that even with auto mount disabled, you can still explicitly mount in your service account that you need. So maybe that is the fix, is disable the automatic mounting so tokens aren't where they're not needed.
That's a good update to that, actually. Yeah.
Right, there
Yeah,
we
and
go.
I think that they're trying to get there where it like, because right now it says unless the pod specifically requires access to the Kubernetes API to operate. And like maybe that's a chance to expand that a little bit and clarify it a little bit of like, because I love the idea of taking away service account tokens, especially like in cloud providers where the Kubernetes auth is federated with the cloud auth from things that don't actually need them. Because
Google's
then that
interesting
could
'cause they-
potentially save you from, you know,
Right.
an exploit chain starting from a vulnerability in that containerized app.
Would it be better for that to, I mean, right, it's better for it to be explicit that you're using that feature than to be implicit on the mount. So I agree with that. And again, I'm going back to GKE because they actually they do it both ways. You can mount the service account to a cloud service or a cloud service account to the pod, right? Or the however you're deploying that asset. So that, I don't know if that applies in other implementations like that. So I don't want to do a one-off call out, right? But I also don't want developers to have a friction there where, okay, we've introduced this guide to evaluate
that says do this thing. Yeah, I mean, there might be an improvement there of make the decision point explicit. So like right now it says auto mount service account token should be set to false unless, and instead if it said something like consider whether your application intentionally accesses the Kubernetes API or potentially your cloud provider API, and set auto mount service account token true or false as appropriate.
Yeah, that seems a little better to be evaluated together, right, with the app developer and the operators.
Yeah. Well, like as an app developer, in the way that at least I imagine the target audience for this doc, it would probably be pretty rare for you to be writing an application that also specifically talks to the Kubernetes API. But I don't know how everybody else does their application design.
So like a lot of our manifests are actually owned by the operations team, right? And the context for the app is provided by the app team in the build, right? So they may not even know whether they're doing that or not.
Yeah.
Conversation point, right? So.
Yeah, I would encourage you. Unfortunately, we are at time. I would encourage you to bring that conversation into the PR there, so that way other folks who are reviewing the PR can also think about these questions, and we can build an answer together.
Cool.
All right, folks. Like a Go program that has exceeded its allotted schedule in Quantum, we are being forced off the processor. So thank you all so much for coming and participating in this space that we make for ourselves to improve Kubernetes security. Reminder that channel SIG security on Kubernetes Slack is always open, and until then, I look forward to seeing folks at the next one. Goodbye, all.
Thank you, friends.